I want to preach you a message entitled, you see it there, Take Your Stand. And when will we take our stand? We know that we have to take a stand for the Lord in all areas of life, at different times of life, and different venues, whether our family, school, workplace, but we have to take a stand for the Lord. And we find Daniel's friends here taking a stand. Well, let's see, number one, the dedication of the image. We'll begin reading in verse 1. We'll read the chapter as we go through it. But number one, the dedication of the image. Look at it, verse 1, chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4. Then an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now you can see the scene that we come upon here. Nebuchadnezzar, most scholars believe it was an image of himself. Now there's some debate about that. The Bible doesn't tell us, but whatever it was, this image, he gives us the height here. You can fill out in the blanks there. It's 90 feet high, and it's 9 feet wide. You think about, you can figure out that from a cubit. We know it's about 18 inches. You think about this in a plain. It's in the plain of Dura, something 90 feet high. We know it's gold covered. I mean, that thing would be brightly shiny in the sun as they would see it. And it's in the plain of Dura where this is set up. And all these people have come. This is the ruler of the known world. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has called all these people to come and worship this image. He desired people to worship him, this image of himself. No doubt he had a pride problem. If you go to Daniel 4, read verse 29 to 32, God deals with his pride later. Remember, he scratches around like an ox for a number of years till he would realize his pride. But he desired people to worship him. And no doubt in this group were other Israelites, other ones that had come over with these Daniel and his 3 friends, but they must have all bowed. We only hear about these 3. Many people ask, well, where was Daniel? Well, Daniel most likely, he was away on business or something like that, because we know Daniel's character. He would not have bowed. He would have stood for God and taken a stand here, but he evidently is not present in this situation when this comes about. And here these men are, and they take a stand for God, these 3. As he calls them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we know them. Of course, their Hebrew names was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Well, here these other Jews bow. We know that goes against directly Jehovah God. He said, I am God, there is none else. They were told in Exodus 20 in the 10 Commandments that thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. But here they are. The pressure that must have been there as they not only are told what they're to do, they're threatened with a fiery furnace, but now everybody around them bows. Everybody. They're in a heathen land. When in Rome, they're in a heathen land. They're bondage. They're slaves in this country that's captive, had taken into captivity. They had been beat in war, defeated, and taken from their home. What are they going to do? Well, God didn't save us then. Why should we obey Him now? But these 3 had faith in God. They believed God. And they knew God was with them. God would see them, though they were away from home, away from family, all of that. Perhaps their family was dead. Then we see, secondly, not only the dedication of the image, but the decree of the king. Look at verse 8. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. Then spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that the time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? We see the decree of the king. Now I'll say this, he must have liked these guys to even give them a second chance. He had promoted them before. He knows that these were the ones that were 10 times better. He knows that they were the ones that prayed with Daniel and Daniel's friends, and he regarded Daniel highly. But they said, if you don't bow the first time, that's it. In that same hour, you'll be taken right to the fiery furnace. But he calls them up and gives them a second chance. Now, can you imagine the vast multitude? If I'm standing here tonight, if I was in an uplifted position like the king would have been, like something like this, or I'm sure much more elaborate, and we all were going to bow to something, and I could very easily see if you bowed or not. This was a great crowd of people. The king could not see everyone. It was people as far as the eye could see. But they, of course, someone saw and told, these men stood. They did not bow. And they bring it to them. And the real issue with them, you find, is in verse 12. You see it? They serve not thy gods. About the end of the verse. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. See, the Chaldeans are bitter against these Jews. They have been for years now, ever since chapter 2. There's quite a few year gap here between chapter 2 and chapter 3. And they're bitter that these guys have taken their job and got their promotion that they should have had. These are slaves. They're Jews. We're Chaldeans, which means they were the people of Babylon. That was their home country. But the real issue was that they were Christians. And they served God and did not worship their gods. They say it right there. And all through history we see Christians being persecuted because they don't worship the gods, the idols. They don't go along with the flow of the world. They don't bow down because the world says bow down. And that's what these men did. So we see the accusation here. Then the challenge. I don't know that I can paint the picture quite for you tonight. But if we could imagine the most powerful person in the world, that was Nebuchadnezzar that they now stand before. He said, bring them to me. No doubt in this sea of people, they're ushered and brought down by the guards, and now they stand in the platform or elevated position, as you can let your imagination, as you would think in a plane where there's all these people in a lifted position somewhere is this king set on a throne and all these people around him and his entourage. And they're brought up before him, and the Bible says he's angry. In verse 13, he's in a rage and fury. He's a proud man. You will bow, you will do. He had conquered the world. This was a man of power. And they stand before him now. This is serious business. This king is not playing. He's being gracious. He must have liked them to even give him a second chance, but he will not be shown up by these three. Not going to happen. No matter how much he likes them, they will go in the fiery furnace. The pressure that would exist on that stage that day was very, very strong. I've never been in the Oval Office, certainly never met a president or things like that. That would be a very, very intense situation in front of some king. If you think of the olden days, I mean, this was that type of thing. He ruled the world. And he says, you will bow. And he challenges their God. Look at the challenge, end of verse 15. Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Boy, it really tests your faith, doesn't it? In God. This really tests your faith in God, or how well you know that God that you say you trust. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. It's fine in here. We all trust God and our faith is in God, and it ought to be. But in this situation here, their faith is being tested. Who is that God? Do you know who I am? Who is that God that's going to protect you? You will go in that furnace. No one will protect you from me. That's what he's saying. The faith that we find here, the decree of the king, this is a powerful king. This is Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon. Well, number 3 tonight, the devotion of the 3 Hebrew children. Now those blanks there before, this really tests your faith in God, or how well you know that God that you say you trust. Then number 3, the devotion of the 3 Hebrew children. The devotion. See the dedication of the image, the decree of the king, now the devotion of these 3. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king. Now you know the Proverbs tells us a soft answer turneth away wrath. I mean, here is the answer of their life. It may be the last. See, I mean, this is an intense situation. Here they're going to answer the king in front of everyone as they look on to see what they're going to say to the king. Life is on the line. Verse 16, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. They say, we're not careful, meaning we are not taking a lot of care in answering you. We are standing with our God. And they answer, and as you imagine, the 3 of them, they didn't speak like robots in unison, but they said they answered, meaning one of them spoke, but they were all in agreement. It's not like the other ones were hitting them. Hey, you're going to get us killed. You know, stop. They were all in agreement. We are standing with God. We will not bow down. And our God is able to deliver us. I mean, He just said, who is that God that can? And He said, our God is. And He will deliver us. He may not deliver us from death, but He will deliver us because we're going to heaven with Him. Wow, the devotion of these 3. Someone has said the quiet, modest, yet with all very positive attitude of faith that these 3 men display is one of the noblest examples in the Scriptures of faith fully resigned to the will of God. The men ask for no miracle. They expect none. Theirs is the faith that says with Job, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Job 13:15. These were men of integrity. Whether God delivered or not, whether God saves us miraculously out of the fire, or whether we are delivered into heaven, we are going to stand for right. We're going to do right. You know, like Bob Jones Sr. used to do right till the stars fall. They were going to do right. No matter what, they were going to do right. They were men of integrity. Boy, we need men like that. We need ladies like that. We need people that are integrity. They're going to do right. No matter who's doing wrong, no matter if everyone else is doing it, everyone else was doing it here. But they said, we're not. We're going to do what's right. They're men of integrity. We see the faith of these 3 in their answer. You know, I think it'd be hard to get some Christians to get in the fiery furnace if God had told them that He was going to deliver them out of it. But these men had no guarantee. They didn't know what was going to happen. But they were men of faith. Wow. These are some giants here. These are some Christians here. They're people that just trusted God, like we say we do, and can as the Lord gives us strength. But these men, the faith in their answer, Gabeline said about them, their answer, verse 17 and 18, we've already read it, when they said that God is able to deliver us and we will not bow down. He said, I quote, this is in your blank there, what victorious language this was. The raging king stood helpless in the presence of these men, with their holy separation and determination born of faith. He could threaten death, but he could not make them sin. He could threaten death, but he could not make them sin. No one can take our integrity from us. Even Job's wife said, curse God and die. And he said, I'm going to keep my integrity. he was going to do right no matter what happened in life. And why? He had done nothing wrong, that all these things that come on Job. And these men here, the most powerful man in all the world, could not make these guys sin. They were going to stand for right. Wow, what testimony. They all were in agreement in their answer. They had counted the cost and found it more important to trust God by faith. They had found it more important to obey God rather than men. What Christians, what testimony. Then we see the faith of the three in their answer. This devotion of these three Hebrew children. Turn with me to Hebrews, would you? We'll hold our place. We're coming back to Daniel to finish the story, but go on over to Hebrews chapter 11 with me, please. Hebrews 11, they're found in the hall of faith, these three. Now, they're not listed by name. God doesn't finish the list. There's much more listed. He could go on, we see, as you read Hebrews chapter 11, but they're mentioned in what they did. Hebrews chapter 11, look at verse 27. The Bible says here, by faith, this is talking about Moses now, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. See, these three saw something. They saw God. They saw beyond the king. They saw beyond Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man in all the world, and they saw God. They saw that the Lord was watching them. And God, my God sees me, and they knew God was watching what would happen. And these men, like Moses, endured in the great pressure of life here because they saw the invisible. They saw God. Well, look at verse 33. As you come down here, you find these men listed. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Well, who's that? Who stopped the mouths of lions? By faith. Yeah, Daniel. Very good. We got one awake down here. Great. Verse 34. Quench the violence of fire. Well, who's that? That's these three. Quench the violence of fire. Escape the edge of sword. Out of weakness were made strong. Wax valiant in fight. Turn to flight the armies of the aliens. Then look at chapter 12 of Hebrews, verse 1 and 2. How did all these men of faith we find in Hebrews 11 do what they did for God? How did they stand in the pressures of life? How did they continue on this faith that they said they did all these things by faith? Well, verse 1 and 2 of chapter 12 says, Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. How? How do I run this race? Verse 2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. Ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. So how are we going to do it? You don't know what race I have to run. I mean, the course I have is a difficult course. This is a hard leg of the run. How am I going to do it? That's what he's saying here. Here's a cloud of witnesses. We've just read Hebrews 11, and by faith Abraham, and by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith these men, and Daniel within the lion's den. They all, by faith. This is the witnesses that says faith in God works. God is real. God will come through. God will meet the needs. He will say, He will do what He says He will do. Well, how can I run the race, this course I have? By looking unto Jesus. How did all these men do it? By looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such contradiction of sinners against himself. Ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. None of us have resisted unto blood yet, striving against sin. We can do it looking unto Him. Consider what He went through. Consider Him who died at no fault of His own, but for Him. Wow. That's how they did it, looking unto Jesus. See, they realized that day they were standing before a greater king than this king, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He was looking down, and though Nebuchadnezzar thought he was in control, God was in control. He was involved in the situation. He was there with them. See, the fear of God erases all lesser fears. When we fear God, we know we're in His hands. And the only place I go is where He leads me. He's my shepherd. I'm following Him. He leadeth me. And everything that comes to me, God is under control. Now, I'm not talking about you get out over here doing your own thing in the far country. I'm talking about when we're following the Lord, reading His Word, walking with God. Things happen in life. Things come to us. Disease to the body, financial troubles, family heartaches. Things come to us. And as we're following Him, we know that He's in control of it all. And He is there. And He knew the path. He knoweth the path that I take, the Bible says, doesn't it? He knows what's on that path. He knew what was coming for me before I ever got to it. He knew, and He's prepared, and He's worked in my life. And so I can make it through. I can run this course by looking to Him. And so that's how they did it. The fear of God erases all other fears. They didn't fear that king, though it was a fearful situation, because they feared the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Many people see the difficulty. Boy, it's easy to do, isn't it? Many people see the fire, that burning fiery furnace, now 7 times hotter, but they've missed seeing God in the situation. Often we are guilty, aren't we, of only seeing what we can feel. When we're told to walk by faith, not by sight, but how often we're caught walking by sight, aren't we? And I just feel like, and we're relying on self instead of walking by faith in Him like we're told to do. Wow, these are great Christians. What a story. You say, well, I'll never have to go through something like this, for my faith. And well, there's people going through stuff like this right now in other countries. And we don't know what we'll face in our nation. You have no idea what circumstances we're going to have to face for God in our lifetime. I have no idea. Neither do you. But we know God and the power of God. He is able to overcome any difficulty we come up against if we'll trust Him. We see fourthly then the deliverance of God. The deliverance of God. Look at verse 19 back in Daniel 3 if you'll flip back over there. Verse 19, we continue the story. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The Bible talked about Jesus' visage was so marred you could hardly recognize Him as a man. Nebuchadnezzar is so mad here, it's like a dark cloud has come over him. I mean, he is so angry that these rotten slaves, these Jews, would stand up and make me look like a fool. He is so angry here. The fury, the form of his visage is changed. The Bible's trying to help us understand his wrath and anger here. He's lost his temper by far. That's a light way of saying it. Against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats and their hose and their hats and their other garments and were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now Nebuchadnezzar makes 2 mistakes here. When we get angry, we always hurt ourselves and hurt other people. He's so angry, he says, get that fire hot. I want it hot. Well, if he really wants to hurt these guys, you want to have it cooler, not hotter. I mean, it was so hot it killed the guys throwing them in. I mean, imagine how quickly they would have died had God not protected them. But he's so mad, he can't think clearly. He's so angry. Get my best men, my most mighty warriors. And so he gets them killed because he's so angry and gets his fire so hot that they get too close and die throwing these men in. And by the way, the devil and his minions always hate when we trust God. You take a step of faith for God, just know it. Satan is going to come with everything he's got against you. He wants to stop you. He wants to defeat you. And these men stood for faith. Everyone else bowed, was cowards. God saw what they did, but they didn't have to face Satan that day. They had already given in. But boy, he wanted these men, and he was so angry, and Nebuchadnezzar's so angry here. And God, the devil hates when we step out by faith in God. Well, the story goes on, verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was a stone-eater, astonished, and rose up in haste and spake and said unto the counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake, and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language that speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So God shows up. The king says, Look what I see. There's 3 men we cast in, but I see 4. And the 4th is like the Son of God. These men that were following the king's orders and throwing the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in, they were killed. But the 3 that got thrown in the fire, the hairs aren't singed on their head. Their clothes aren't changed. They don't smell even of fire. They're alive and well. They're having a meeting there with God in the fire. There's no safer place than the center of God's will for our life. These men had stood for right. God had led them this way, and they had stood in courage, men of integrity. I spoke to you last Wednesday night about boldness, and boldness isn't screaming and hollering or being belligerent. That's not boldness, but boldness is just being willing to speak when it's not popular. Being willing to stand. These guys didn't jump up and down and scream and holler, You bunch of heathens, bow! And they didn't do any of those things. They just would not bend to the clear command of God. They were bold. They had courage. They weren't ugly. They weren't mean. But they were firm. They were going to obey God rather than man. They had boldness. This is it in action, what we talked about last Wednesday. These men had boldness. And what a testimony, what a witness they give here with their life. Nebuchadnezzar the king now speaking to everyone as they all peer close to look. They all gather around, the Bible says in verse 27, being gathered together as they're looking to see what has happened to these men, that they're not hurt and what's going on. And the king is wondering and he's astonished. And now a new decree from the king. He says, Look what I see. Verse 28, it says, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants, notice, that trusted in him. What had these men done that was so special? I'll tell you what they did. They trusted God. What does that mean? They just believed God. God says we don't do that, so they didn't. We don't bow to idols. We will not bow to these graven images. I am the Lord, there is none else. You'll only worship me. And so they just believed God and only worshiped Him. And He makes a decree, verse 29, that every people, nation, language, the beginning of the decree was bow and worship this image of me. But now, verse 29, I make another decree that every people, nation, language that speak anything amiss against this God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be cut in pieces. Their house shall be made a dunghill, because there's no other God that can deliver after this sort. Well, I tell you, shame on those Israelites that bowed. Can you imagine when God showed up? The captain of their salvation, their deliverer, their Jehovah God showed up and they had bowed. Could you imagine? Yeah, one day God's coming back for us. He's going to appear in the clouds. The trump's going to sound. He's going to show up here and we're going to be gone to meet Him. Can you imagine being caught doing the wrong thing and not serving, not faithful, not a servant found faithful when God returns? Boy, can you imagine how happy those 3 were that they stood? I'm sure there was lump in their throat. I'm sure their knees were knocking. I'm sure it wasn't easy. It certainly wasn't the easy route, but they had done right, and God had showed up and met with them, and a day they would never forget, a day we will never forget, as it's written in the Scriptures for us, and every generation since has heard of it. You know, we want God to take away our trials, don't we? We want God to remove the fiery furnace. God says, I'm going to go with you through the trials. I'll be with you in the furnace. And He was with them. Others can see Christ because of you. This is an amazing thought to me. The unsaved can see God by our faith in God. Here, a whole nation, all these rulers, these governors, these sheriffs, these princes, the king of the known world, Nebuchadnezzar, they all saw God that day because of 3 slaves. Because their trust in God. They all saw God. I mean, think of the impact. I mean, you think, well, who am I? You know, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know my background. You don't know how I grew up. I mean, I'm glad I'm saved and God's mercy to save someone like me, but I mean, I really can't do that much. You know, I just don't have many gifts. But think what these guys could have said. Our parents were killed. We watched them be killed when Babylon was had taken over Jerusalem. Because of the sin of our parents and the generation before us, God's judgment came on us and we were killed. And we were taken in captivity and grew up as slaves, eunuchs it would appear. I mean, here we are, we don't even have our old names. We're called by these heathen names. They're trying to erase God from our mind. A whole new country, new culture, different gods, just nothing have we ever known. And I mean, what can we do? We're slaves. We've been conquered. I mean, what can we do here? But by faith, they impact a whole country by just a few. I mean, think of the amazing story here. These few impact Babylon, the great wonder, because of their faith in God. So what can God do in your life or mine? What could God do with us? And we think often too small, but our God's a big God, a great God. And He wants to do great things in our life. Now, I'm not predicting a fiery furnace for you, but there's other types of trials and things that God has used to do great things, even in recent history. And God wants to do the same in our life, if we'll trust Him. Will we trust Him? Boy, Nebuchadnezzar went from verse 15, who is that God that can deliver you, to verse 28, blessed be the God. And there is no other God like this God. Imanjui was an Egyptian Muslim. Grew up in Egypt, his family was wealthy, had the best education, a lot of poverty over there. He's still alive. This is recent history of people that have, a couple books that I have of people that have suffered for their faith in our day. He's still living. This was written in 2005. But he grew up as a Muslim. Went to the mosque and all this. At the age of 15, his parents were wealthy. His dad had influence in government as well as the local judges, all that type of thing, because of donations, as well as he was a powerful man, well-known man. At age 15, he comes home. They've been wealthy, his dad and mom. His dad's packed. He's leaving. His mother, 4 kids. He's the oldest of 4. The Imanjui is heard, as you can imagine. And in their culture, of course, her and the family are considered outcasts. And they are the ones in their own where he is still popular and has, the reason he left, he would find out, Imanjui would find out that he found a lady about half his mother's age, and he was engaged to now marry her. And their family that had been wealthy and all the privilege they had had now is in deep poverty. And 3 years later, he's working at age 18 in a suit place, and his dad would wear tailored suits and things. He comes to clock in one day, and there's his dad with this fiancée, this younger woman. And he thinks, this is so wrong. He is still looked at with admiration, and he has influence, and our family is outcast, and we were looked down upon, my mom and us, and he left us for another woman. This is awful. He's a Muslim. Well, he has another customer that comes in named Ahmad, and Ahmad is a Christian. He noticed about Ahmad, about his life, and how he doesn't gossip about others like other people. He sees a life that's just different, that he doesn't understand, that's changed, and he ends up getting to befriending this guy, and they would go to coffee on occasion, go to a sporting event on occasion. When not long, he shares with him about his mother and his mother's needs, and how she's been now gone into poverty. They don't even have the things they need, and groceries. And the next day, groceries, two ladies from his church, Ahmad's church, show up at his mom's house and bring groceries and care for them. And he's so blown away by that, he ends up talking to him more about religion and things. He gets saved there in a cafe. Boy, he's so excited about his new faith, he starts telling people there at work. And as he works with other clients there at the suit store, he's witnessing him. A few months go by and there's a knock at his door and they haul him off to prison. For now, I think it's written down, he's 5 weeks imprisoned. 5 weeks. No explanation. 5 weeks go by and they release him. No explanation. Sign these documents and they release him. He goes back to work, to his job, but he has no more job. He's blacklisted from his work because now he's an infidel. He's a convert. He's a Christian. He looks for work, can't find work, but he has a friend, Ahmad, and Ahmad helps him get a job at a cafe, and he works there. And as he's working there, he's able to witness to people at the tables, and God uses that, and he's seeing people saved. Starts a Bible study there. Has 7 coming, 4 of them converts that have gotten saved. A familiar dock at the door again, and he's taken to prison again. It's just like before. 14 weeks now he's kept in prison. They bring him into a trial, have an 8-week trial that would go on every week, another time before these judges and stuff. And finally, after they ask all these questions, all these things, he said, I want to know, you guys are supposed to be these Muslim leaders, and what's right about my mom being an outcast and us kids having nothing, yet my father is still, after leaving our family and abandoning us, is respected in the community. Same type of thing. They let him go, and the whole thing, his trial, all is erased like it never happened. He goes back to his job at the cafe. He no longer can have a job there, and so he begins working, doing odd jobs, and works hard, and God gives him influence. He has his own business, and he's witnessing to people. It starts another Bible study, and has maybe a dozen coming. Now he meets a young girl, and they get married, and they have their first child on the way. And he has another familiar knock on the door. Taken to prison again for 14 weeks. Finally, the key on the door opens in his cell room, and there his dad walks in to his cell. His dad says, they're going to kill you within 48 hours. If you will not sign that you deny the Lord Jesus, they will kill you. If you'll sign these papers and leave Egypt, promise never to return, you can live. He says, I cannot deny the Lord who died for me. He said, enough of this nonsense. They're going to kill you. Do you understand me? He said, He died for me. I won't deny my faith. His dad, with his hands in his face and his hands, crying as he leaves. The next morning, his dad shows up and he says, he's not in a state to sign these, and he has influence, his dad. I'll sign it for him. He doesn't understand this. And he said, I do understand. I will not sign it. But because of his dad's influence, they let his dad sign it and release him. And he has 72 hours to get out of the country. They sell everything they have and move to France, him and his young wife. And there, he begins to, again, witness and things, has freedom there in France. About a year later, his dad has a dream. Brings all these things back, God working on his heart about his son. And because of that, he seeks this Ahmad out in his church and gets saved. Goes back to his mother after all these years, the dad does. Go back to his mother and apologizes for what he did and how it was wrong. The mother is so moved by it. She says, I must need this Jesus. He's never apologized, ever. I've never seen apologies to anyone, and never to me. She gets saved, ends up moving to France, living with him as well, his son, her son. He now spoke at some conference in Switzerland, this man, and I don't know all about everything with his life, but he said this when asked about, how did you not waver when facing death? How did you not waver in your faith? And he said this, I quote, our commitment to Jesus Christ should not be based on whether or not we will face persecution. It is not determined by whether or not our decisions will be easy or difficult. Our commitment must be based on our understanding that Jesus Christ is the only true and living God. And our foremost allegiance must be to God Himself, no matter what the cost. When we understand this truth, it deepens our commitment and makes it easy to live or die for our faith. It's powerful. When you come to your fiery furnace, your test of faith, will you look past the trial? Will you take your stand? Will you see God in the situation? Faith erases fear. You say, I'd been too fearful of the fire. I'd been too fearful to trust God. But when you see God, even standing before the King of all the earth, the known world, you could stand because of your faith in God. When you see God in the situation. Verse 30, God rewards them. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God has a sense of humor. Think of how mad the Chaldeans must have been. They were so mad at these guys anyway, and they get promoted even further because of their faith. But conclusion tonight, what about you? Where will you take your stand? For these three, it didn't start in a fiery furnace. It started with just trusting God with their food. They took a stand that we're not going to eat the king's meat. We're not going to drink his wine. They took a stand there because it wasn't right. We're not going to defile ourselves. That's where it started, and their faith grew. And now, in the fiery furnace, they stood for God. But where will you take a stand? You see our world going worse and worse. The world's getting worse and worse. It's sicker and sicker. The more you watch the news, the issues of the day. You pick any issue, all of us have to take a stand somewhere. You pick any topic. Dress, your music, your movies, social media. You got to take a stand somewhere. And we got to make up our mind. No matter what the cost, I'm going to stand with God. I mean, you're going to draw the line somewhere. We're all going to wear something. We'll talk about clothes. We're all going to wear something, so you're going to draw the line somewhere. We're not walking around with nothing on, right? So we're drawing the line somewhere in what we're going to wear. But where are you going to take your stand? You just going to take your stand somewhere out there, or are you going to stand with God in modesty and identity? In music, well, I like a little of this music or that, or where are you going to take your stand? Are you going to just stand where you think, or are you going to stand with God and what's right? In every topic you could pick for. What about our testimony at work? Is we going to stand and be a Christian, not be ashamed of it? Or are we going to, I'm for God, but I like to have a little fun too and try to get along and fit in. Where are we going to take our stand? These men chose to stand for God. And this is our opportunity to take our stand. This is our day, our time to stand for God. These men stood when others bowed. And some of you have been through trials. You've been through some tough times. And now you look back and you're so glad because in those times, it was then you learned to get a hold of God. And you found that in those trials, God got a hold of you. You learned to trust Him by faith. But all of us have to take our stand. Stand for the Lord. Stand with God. Stand for right. Who will let God get a hold of them today? I'm going to let God take control of my life. I'm going to put my faith and trust in Him.